Providing service to all 120 counties. If you're not familiar with the Small Business Development Centers, or SBDCs for short, allow me to share a little bit about what we do. So we provide assistance to entrepreneurs like yourself, regardless of what point you are in the life cycle of your business. So if you're just starting out, we can assist with market research or business plan development, and help you find startup capital. For existing businesses, we can assist in growing your business, whether that's hiring your first employee, or you want to find funding to expand your operations, or maybe you're at a point where you need help with cash flow, or even considering pivoting your business. We have folks that can help with that. Or maybe you're ready to retire, or you want to sell your business and move on to a new venture. We have a professional staff that has a wide array of knowledge and experience in various industries that can provide a customized service to meet all those particular business needs. We do this at no cost to you, thanks to the U.S. Small Administration, who co-sponsors our program. It's then administered through the University of Kentucky in partnership with other regional universities, community colleges, and local economic development agencies. We're part of a national network, America's Small Business Development Centers, which means there's a small business development center to serve every corner of the U.S. To learn more about us in particular, you can visit our website at kybizhelp.com. There you'll find additional resources to help fund or help start, fund, and grow your business. You'll also find all the social channels that we're active on. So find your favorite and connect to stay up to date on news, services, and events such as these. To go ahead and request personal assistance, you can email us at info@kybizhelp.com or call 1-888-475-7232. So a recording of today's webinar will be emailed to you later on today. So if you need to step away or you're having trouble with some technical issues, just know you'll have access to the full recording later on today. So moderating today's event is my fellow staff from the Louisville Center, Dave Atkins, Center Director, and Tony Sears, our Assistant Center Director. Good afternoon, folks.
Hey, Janet.
Hi, Janet.
Hi.
So, well, today is a big day in my mind because we had a big weekend where the president signed into law some new changes to the Paycheck Protection Program. And so we really needed to kind of understand what's going on. And today we've had a great guest with us. We have Steve Skaggs, who's Senior Vice President at People's Bank. He's a government guarantee credit officer and really knows this stuff and really spends a lot of time digging into the nuts and bolts of all these changes in the Paycheck Protection Program. And I know you have a lot of questions, as I do. And as we go forward, just put your questions in the chat, and we'll get through as many as we can before the program's over today. So don't forget to do that. Ask as many questions as you like. And with that, I'd like to say hello to Steve. Steve, how are you?
Good, good. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you as well as the group today.
Well, without wasting any more time, let's just jump into the meat of the matter today.
Okay, perfect then. I'll go ahead and start the presentation there. It should already popped up. So today, obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about PPP forgiveness, and obviously, it is really the next step for your business. PPP forgiveness is a ongoing and also ever-changing process, as we've seen throughout this entire Paycheck Protection Program. Obviously, next slide, excuse me, here's a little bit about me. Obviously, David already gave you the introduction there and kind of let you know what my role is at People's Bank and how long I've been dealing with SBA and USDA B&I lending. Next slide here. I think I always like to talk about history and where we're at today came from obviously certain actions that we're taking. So obviously back on 13th of 2020, that's pretty much when the pandemic was declared. And at that point in time, that kicked off what I would call congressional action in high gear. And that congressional action obviously ended in what we know as the CARES Act. And part of the CARES Act under two separate sections, the numbers I believe are 1102 and 1106, we were able to come up with the Paycheck Protection Program. And out of that Paycheck Protection Program, became what we know as PPP, and what we've been able to actually help businesses and certain nonprofits in the state of Kentucky. Obviously, I put a third date down there because I think a lot of people don't remember that June 5th was an extremely important day. Obviously, that was the day that the president signed into law the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act for 2020. And that one there was obviously some of the changes that occurred, the covered period, going from 8 to 24 weeks, allowing us to go from the 75-25 down to the 60-40. It also really extended the capability for our borrowers to have a longer what I call deferral period. So that deferral period after the covered period is now 10 months, which I think for a lot of our borrowers, that's a great thing because it'll allow them to really get their documentation in order before they move into the forgiveness cycle. And the one thing that I don't have on here, because obviously this presentation was presented and prepared prior to the action with President Trump on July 4th, is that we did have an official extension, and that extension came out in an SBA procedural notice ending in 20035, and that's where the official extension did go on from the program, going from the end of 6/30 all the way out to August 8th. So at this point in time, we are still in what could be called the origination phase. But a lot of us and a lot of our clients, obviously, across the country are really moving into what's known as the forgiveness page. So like I said before, I always like to provide a little bit of history, kind of talking about why we are where we're at today and why we're talking about forgiveness. So obviously, these are some information that I want to give out to the group to give you an idea how complex and how difficult PPP has been. So obviously, I put up there a disclaimer that is as of July 1st. There has been 22 interim final rules, so the IFRs. Obviously, if you don't know where they are or where they're located at, typically the best site I like to send people to is the U.S. Treasury .gov site. They have a red banner across the top. You click on that red banner, it takes you to a lender borrower page, and it has the information there on all the IFRs. There also is also the next step I talked about was the FAQs, the frequently asked question. We now have 49 of those to date. Now, what's also interesting, just so you know, back on, I'm checking paperwork here, on June 26th, they actually modified a series of the questions because of the PPP Flexibility Act, actually striking some language and putting the 24-week language in there. So to make it easier for a lot of people, they consolidated some questions about the PPP program and put them into a shorter 10-page packet, which I believe the state of Kentucky's SBA district office did send out to everybody on their mailing list. So it's a nice little tool here if it makes it a little bit easier for you. But this covers all the changes to the 49. To give you an idea, there's currently 3 versions of PPP application information out there. Keep in mind, we had the original ones in March, which were immediately replaced the day before the applications opened. And we continue to see revisions and items to help us out working on. Also with the PPP loan forgiveness, remember we started off there with one longer application, the 3508. That actually now has been shortened. And then also we now have the SBA 3508EZ. So as I tell people, be patient. Changes continue to occur. And a lot of people ask, why do so many changes occur? Well, the biggest reason why is there's a lot of congressional oversight for this program. And through those congressional oversights, that's how we got the 3508EZ. Obviously, through congressional oversight, that's one of the reasons why we have a longer period now for origination. So the idea is they continue to tweak the program based upon the Congress, which actually will, obviously make it law, and obviously the president will send it into law. So, the actions they're taking is a direct reflection of what they feel will help the economy as well as small businesses in our country. So don't be surprised if over the coming weeks and months, we continue to see tweaks to the PPP program. But as I said, it was July 1st, 22 interim final rules, 49 FAQs, multiple versions of the PPP application, which it'll be interesting to see if we have new ones based upon the August 8th date now. And then obviously the forgiveness. And I would, like I said before, wait, there will be more. Moving on to some, I think, some very key and important phrases in some of the changes that occurred with the act, and also that are kind of generic between whether it's the very first interim final rule all the way to, I think I quote 19 here and 3. Things that need to know: covered period. I think that is one of those areas where, this has been a big change for our borrowers during about the covered period. So there was some changes that were made in interim final rule 19 that kind of changed the meaning of the phrase. It elongated it, talked about the 8-week covered period, kind of, they took out that language and kind of replaced it with covered period to make it a lot more flexible for our borrowers. So, obviously, whenever you're looking at what's the right covered period for each borrower or for business, that really should be a conversation not with the bank, and probably not with the SBA. As long as it fits in that covered period, then it should be a conversation with your trusted partners who help you with either the preparation of your PPP application, your CPA, the people you work with, because they'll help you decide what that covered period is. Because, that June 5th date, I'm going to reference back to it. There was a lot of changes where it gave people whose loan numbers were issued prior to June 5th flexibility that wasn't there. Minimum maturity period. So that's another thing that happened on June 5th. They took it from these being maximum maturity period of 2 years up to 5 years. Now, one thing I will put in here when it talks about this is if your PPP loan had an SBA loan number issued prior to June 5th, any change to the maturity period must be mutually agreed upon between the lender and the borrower. Anything June 5th and thereafter that has an SBA loan number that was issued, it's the 5 years what the standard is. So I keep on mentioning June 5th because that's a very important day with the Paycheck Protection, the PPP Flexibility Act. That was the day it was enacted into law, and these changes became different. Now, what's nice is if you had your SBA loan number issued prior to 6/5, you have flexibility. 6/5 and after, this is the program. So it's what you have to select and what you have to do, but that's a decision you don't have to make alone. Your bank doesn't make for you because the banks are processors and confirmation. It's actually for you as the business owner, business enterprise, nonprofit, along with your trusted partner and how you complete your paperwork. So that kind of talks about those 2 days there, but those were huge coming out of the June 5th as far as the definition of the covered period and the minimum maturity period changing. Okay, moving on, let's talk about this deferral period. So typically in interim final rule number 17, they did change the language of the deferment. Now, initially we kept on talking about it was 6 months. And I know we at our institution, we had concerns about that because we're looking at, well, there's an 8-week covered period, and then you got 6 months, but it's going to take 60 days at your bank, 90 days at the SBA. You're going to probably have to start making payments, or there's going to be money coming out of your pocket before we'd hear back from the SBA on forgiveness. So with the PPP Flexibility Act, one of the things that occurred was that the loan forgiveness period is now 10 months after the end of your loan forgiveness covered period. So that covered period is very important, the period in which you use the funds, but this deferral period is an additive on top of that. So typically it allows our customers more time to process the PPP application to make sure that they will get full, obviously the goal of this PPP is for loan forgiveness. And obviously that's why a lot of people took the money, because the capability of not having to pay it out of working capital, it would actually be able to pay itself back for usage and stuff like that. So it's a nice program that way, and allows you to get the influx of capital and then a delayed payback. But this change here was huge for clients, And I think that's the reason why I wanted to make sure that people noticed the deferral period there. So I think it's a part of the program that's great for the clients, great for the business owners and the nonprofits, because it gives you a little bit more time to get your paperwork in order. Okay, the loan forgiveness covered period. This is once again quoting to interim final rule number 17. And a lot of stuff you see in quotes, I'm actually taking it right out of the interim final rule as far as the language in there. So talking about the June 5th date there, once again, talks about the loan forgiveness covered period. So that's the thing there. They went with the 24-week period, and obviously begins with the PPP loan dispersed. So always remember your covered period always begins when the funds are dispersed. So obviously, if there is a delay from your bank from the date you sign it until the funds are dispersed, it's obviously that date of fund disbursement is the date you're looking at. But however, if it was made before June 5th, you may elect a shorter period for the PPP, as little as 8 weeks. So what's nice is if you have a loan that received an SBA loan number prior to June 5th, you have that flexibility where after June 5th, the 24 weeks is what they have. Now, I want to put that, and I put it down in a big bold letters at the bottom. Keep in mind though that this entire time during the loan forgiveness covered period, as well as the deferral period, the loan continues to accrue interest. Obviously, the rate is very attractive at 1%. But the idea is you do need to submit that loan forgiveness loan application within that time period to avoid having to make any principal and interest payments after the deferment period. So, you got the loan covered period followed by the deferral period. So obviously there's a time frame there, but we want to make sure that we meet that time frame for our customers, and then also for the SBA guidance. Another thing here, getting ready for loan forgiveness. I think these are pretty much generic things, and I'll be honest, these are not my original thoughts. I've been on a lot of CPA calls, some national, some regional, and I think the biggest thing that they say is to use those 3 words: document, document, document your use of your PPP funds. And I think the best advice I've heard from some of my CPA partners and centers of influence is you need to treat this as if this is an IRS audit. Keep your documentation complete. Keep the files. Obviously, there is a look back period on this. Obviously, the government has so many years they can come back and audit your PPP loan. So you want to make sure that you document everything. Keep your files fresh. Make sure they're properly updated. And once you've completed your forgiveness application and you've heard back from the SBA and your loan hopefully is forgiven 100%, doesn't mean you're done. Keep that documentation and keep it available for any future audit purposes. I put on there too that a lot of national accounting trade associations have developed these great worksheets to kind of walk you through the process. Notice I didn't say the national banks did that. It is national accounting trade associations. Those are your partners in kind of helping with the PPP application and also the forgiveness application. So, my biggest suggestion I would say is don't do this alone. Obviously, your business has a lot of trusted partners. Your nonprofit has a lot of trusted partners. Make sure you leverage those trusted partners as a way to make sure that you complete your forgiveness application as possible, as well as possible. Obviously, my third note there is be patient. And the reason why I say that is, if you've realized from my earlier slides, 22 interim final rules, 49 FAQs, multiple versions of the forgiveness application already. There will be more coming before this is done. That is my opinion. That's not the opinion of my bank, but that's just my opinion of how this will work. Because as we continue to have additional congressional oversight, we will have changes to the program. And I know we are members of NAGLE, which is the National Association of Government Guaranteed Lenders, if you've never heard of that before. But NAGLE actually sends out congressional updates from their team in DC. And there actually has been proposed legislation in the Senate looking for that magic automatic forgiveness. Now, dollar amounts have been thrown out. Obviously, none of this is law. None of this, it's discussion legislation. But there may be more opportunities for broader forgiveness for smaller dollar amounts. So one of the things I keep on saying is be patient. you do have time, that 10-month deferment after your cover period, you may want to look at your options and see if legislation may move in your favor before you apply for your forgiveness. And the fourth item there is know your covered period and then build your application timeline from the end of that period. So what I'm saying is, know that period, know what the beginning date and end dates are. And obviously that beginning date's pretty easy on your covered period because that's the date your funds are dispersed, but know what you're going to use, know how you're going to document it, and then start building out, realizing, okay, I got this much time to get my application done because I know my bank partner has 60 days before they have to make a decision. And then it goes to the SBA, and the SBA has up to 90 days before they have to let us know. So keep in mind, of that 10-month period, 5 months of it is optionally between your bank and the SBA for a decision. So even if you think about the time there, it gives you some time to work through it and see if the program will make any changes in your benefit before you start doing, a lot of work on your project there. So, what SBA form do I use? Now, this gets very interesting because right now we know there's two forms. We originally started off with a long form, the SBA Form 3508. What I will let you know is that on June 16th, it was revised. So what they did was they kind of shortened it down based upon some of the congressional oversight, and they kind of broke it down into the application instructions and then the application itself. And then the second part is there's now that 3508 EZ form, and that one's even smaller. I believe it's a 3-page application with like 4 pages of instructions. But keep in mind, that's not everything you're going to need. You're going to need your documentation on how you use the funds. So going back to the previous slides, document, document, document. You really need to make sure that you're using the funds as the program outlines and also for the approved purposes. But by having a longer covered period, it actually could be beneficial to see more payroll go through the program for yourself. But obviously, that's not the bank's decision. You need to work with your partners who help you with the application and in the forgiveness application to make sure that you've met those standards. The bank's role in forgiveness is really a confirmation and a decision to the SBA. So, we should not be assisting in the completion of any 3508 or 3508 EZ. That should be done by the client, the borrower, nonprofit, with their partners, so the bank can do its confirmations and then the final decision that gets forwarded to the SBA. So just to keep that in mind, the forgiveness process right now, what we know is there's a 3508 long form and a 3508 EZ, which is the shorter form. But I'd stay tuned to see if there's more changes, not only to these two forms, but potentially there could be additional documentation based upon either pending legislation in DC or the discussion of maybe new legislation being presented either later this month or early next month. Okay, so once again, I'm going to go back again over the timeline. And obviously, I jumped ahead a slide talking about it before, but the lender must issue a decision on your forgiveness application no later than 60 days after receipt of a complete loan forgiveness application. Now, I did put in there, please note to use the word complete. Obviously, depending on which application you use, complete could be slightly different. But I think the idea is, the banks or your processor who's handled your PPP loan will need to make sure that everything is there to be able to make a decision. And, typically, like I said before, the way the legislation is written for the banks, there are things we need to confirm, and then there needs to be a decision based upon those confirmations. So the idea is, to be able to do that, we will need to have complete information from the borrower. Okay. Now, like I said before, the next step after the banks complete their part is we move on to the SBA review. And the SBA has made it very clear that they have the right to review all applications. So not the ones over 2 million. Every application could be subject to review. And obviously, within that not later than 90 days, they will remit to the bank the appropriate forgiveness amount plus any accrued interest after the lender issues its decision to the SBA. So now keep in mind, though, the SBA's decision could be the loan doesn't qualify for forgiveness. So just because the bank permits it or submits it with a decision to forgive does not mean it'll be rubber stamped by the SBA. The SBA has stated in this that it is subject to any SBA review. So the SBA is keeping the right to review all or any and all loans that are submitted for forgiveness. So obviously your bank doesn't control whether or not your loan will be forgiven, but the bank does submit the completion and a decision with that. So it is something that's a two-step process. So like I said, think about your timeline, think how long you have before you want to submit, and then think about what your bank has time to do, and then what the SBA needs time to do. So it is a little bit longer process, and I think a lot of us thought would happen, but I think it's an honest process where we know the days and we should be able to help our customers. So obviously everybody wants to know, when will lenders start taking PPP forgiveness applications? And I am, if anything, I am honest with my bankers as well as borrowers that I talk to. And right now, I don't know what the answer is. I know a lot of banks, because of the sheer volume of this program, actually borrowed people from other parts of their institutions that maybe not as working as hard, maybe when the retail branches were closed, or different operations areas were not working at capacity. They helped with, in a lot of institutions, the PPP application process. Well, all those applications that came in that short window of time are now going to be asking for forgiveness. So typically the lenders are working with either outside software vendors, online or automated systems, to help them with that process. And a lot of lenders want to do that so that way the customer and the businesses and the nonprofits have a better experience. So obviously it would be something that, depending on who your lender is, they may choose to try to do this all automated, and God bless them. Or they may choose to do it manually, and then really God bless them. But the idea is it's a tough process, and there'll be a lot of work to do. But the one thing I will say, and it's very, very true, is that a lot of banks and a lot of lenders are waiting to open up their portals, because once we accept and confirm there's a complete application, we have 60 days. At this point in time, we have no vehicle to send a decisioned loan forgiveness package to the SBA. The SBA has no portal, no methodology for us to actually pass it along. And if you've follow along like any job boards, or even looking at SBA.gov, there are open positions that the Small Business Administration is hiring for, and probably part of the hiring is anticipation of this program being able to help with the process. That's an assumption on my part, but I do see an awful lot of openings that are coming out there for people to come work on a contract basis to kind of help. And the assumption in my part and others of my position is that they're probably looking at bringing on people to help with the volume of paperwork. You think about how much in dollars has been already lent out, and then how many individual businesses have been helped. So the banks are being very cautious and very careful as far as when they're going to be able to open that application process, because we just don't have a way to decision it and then move it to forgiveness. Once we have that, I think you'll see all of us lenders will become a lot more responsive, and we'll be able to move things through our pipelines. But I think that's a huge part of it. And like I said, I just want to be honest with you. There is a lot of stuff going on the forgiveness process. There's a lot of vendors out there that are working with their banks. A lot of banks are setting up their manual process. But at this point in time, like I said, once we know what the SBA or the process by which the SBA can take an application, I think you'll see a lot more lenders being a lot more communicative about their PPP loan forgiveness process. So that kind of talks about the guts of my presentation here. I know based upon obviously our presenters and our dialogue, I had about up to 40 minutes for the presentation, but I think it sounds like we had a lot of questions that came in beforehand, and also going to have chat. So I wanted to be generous and give a couple minutes back so we wouldn't have to go to 2 o'clock with questions. So Dave, do you want to go ahead and stop the slideshow, or how would you like me to do that?
Yeah, I'll take care of that for you. Sure. Thank you very much, Steve. That was good.
Thank you.
So we do have lot of questions, and here's one I get all the time, so I'm going to ask the first question. So if I applied and received a PPP loan, let's say in April, and I've exhausted the funds, can I come back and get another PPP loan?
As of today, the answer is no, because it's one PPP loan per EIN. My understanding is from my NAGL congressional update, there is a discussion in DC that certain industries may have, and I say may have because obviously this is a bill under discussion, it is not a law, that there may be a second loan program. I think it's like Senate Bill 4117. The number's somewhere in my head, but I'd have to find it in writing. But there is discussion, but it would be very restrictive who could be part of it. And also it's not a law yet. So at this point in time, the answer is no. But as I said before, more to come because this program continues to change and provide surprises for us.
Yeah, that is one thing that we've all been living through is just the weekly IFRs where things change. So
very true.
Tony, you got any questions out there for us?
I sure do, Dave. Excellent presentation, Steve. It was
Thank you.
Very informational. So Lisa Kurtzinger, she says, hey, I thought we had 24 weeks now and didn't have to use the 60/40, but could use 100% for payroll costs. Could you give a little clarification about how we can use it more?
Well, I think number one, let's be honest. I kept on mentioning June 5th. June 5th. So number one, you can use 100% for payroll, which would be great. The issue is these are minimums that were changed on June 5th. So prior to June 5th, it had to be 75% or more was used for payroll. And then globally, they said it could go down to 60% or more. If you want to use 100% for payroll, more power to you. Because to me, and I've talked to my bankers and my lenders, it's called the Paycheck Protection Program for a reason. It's not called Pay My Rent Program or Pay My Utility Bill, but they allowed that because to properly function a business, you may have to have pay for rental space, you may have to pay utilities, but you know, and once again, that's not me talking, that's the legislation. I think it was IFR 19 and 7, when they had those three together, they kind of changed all that. But if you can use more than 60%, that's the minimum for forgiveness application. So I don't ever confuse that you have to use exactly 60 or you have to use it's the idea is it's a minimum expectation. And so you want to make sure if you're using more than that, then talk with your advisor, work with your CPA, work with your payroll provider, because guess what? You're gonna have to provide all those documents at the time you take forgiveness.
Great answer.
Yeah.
So can I still keep going?
Yep.
Okay. All righty. So Autumn says, hey, the program continues to change. Should we wait to do the forgiveness application or fill it out as soon as possible since we aren't sure what will change?
Well, my advice has been to all our bankers here at People's Bank is to find out what's the intent of your borrower is. If for you need to have this loan off your books and forgiven by 12/31/2020, then I think once you have a completely prepared packet and your lender has opened the opportunity to accept it, the forgiveness, then it makes sense. But if the issue is, we have some nonprofits as well as some businesses that, have asked us, how soon can I submit? How soon can I submit? Because, for them, they have audited financial statements or reviewed financial statements, which this could have an impact on leverage ratios, ability to repay, and they obviously want to get it off their books as soon as possible. But I will always say, when you're ready, make sure your partners are ready to support you. Because if your CPA, your accountant, needs to understand your process so they can help you prepare it. So, obviously, as of today, I don't know of any bank that's accepting PPP loan forgiveness applications just because we have no way to submit it. But if you get yourself ready, it shouldn't be a problem. But the idea is kind of think about what's your motivation? Why do you want it forgiven so fast? Because the rules so far have changed in the benefit of the business and the nonprofit. They have not gotten worse, they've gotten better for every class. So to me, it's like, if you wait a little bit, things might get better. And especially on the smaller dollars, that's where I think you may still see some congressional action.
That's good advice, Steve.
Thank you.
So,
Tony? Okay.
Another one there for.
Okay, so this question comes from Deshaun and also Sue Bradford. Deshaun wants to know, can I use my remaining funds of my Paycheck Protection Program under the 8-week window? And then Sue is saying, is it still an 8-week period or has that actually changed?
Well, here's the question, because I don't know this answer. When did you get your loan, number one? And the idea is, you know, for all borrowers, whether it's June 5th or after, June 5th or before, you know, there's 24 weeks is available. So, you know, the 8 weeks was the original covered period in legislation, which has been stricken based upon the Paycheck, you know, the PPP Flexibility Act. You know, that covered period no longer is defined as 8 weeks because now it can be a variable part. I think the idea is some of the more recent FAQs and also some commentary publicly is that, you know, when your PPP funds are exhausted, that's when you should think about applying for loan forgiveness. So if that occurs in week 12 or week 17 or week 21, you know, it appears that the language that's out there would allow you to do that at that point in time. So, you know, it's no longer, you know, everybody was geared towards this 8-week period. And they even went to the point of making the 8-week period either a cash basis or, you know, accrual basis to kind of help people out for accounting purposes, depending upon the sophistication. I still think the language is now broader that gives you flexibility, but anybody June 5th and after, the covered period is defined as 24 weeks. And then prior to that, you could choose the 8-week or the 24. But I think there's been some narrative coming out of DC that says, you know, there's a little bit more flexibility, you know, minimum of 8, no greater than 24 for people prior to 6/5. So I know it's a long answer, but I would still work with your partners to kind of define what's my usage, you know, how did I use it? Because I think there's a lot more flexibility, and there continues with the Flexibility Act. We got a lot more flexibility out of DC.
Okay, so can I still stick with this same subject? Clarissa says, will you give an example of the periods discussed with actual dates, you know, like the loan covered period and then the deferred period? She says she's a little confused about how to apply for the 10-month deferral.
You don't apply. You don't apply for the deferral. Deferral was automatic. When they made the PPP Flexibility Act, it automatically went from 6 months to 10 months deferment. And the way the act does it, I believe it was on one of my slides. I actually took the definition out of there. It's the loan forgiveness covered period. That's your 8 or 24 or whatever time. And as soon as you're done with that, you have 10 months of deferment after the loan forgiveness covered period. So, you know, it's, if you remember initially in the act, they talked about 8 weeks, which was 56 days. They actually put it in, you know, in the, you know, in some of the questions, it's 56 days. Well, now with 24 weeks, you're talking, that's a lot more days. So that's like over 200 days. I'd have to do my math here real quick. 24 times 7. So 168 days, but then you got to add 10 months to that. So if you look at the documentation on the 3508s, I think you got to have this in, you know, sometime next year. So there, you know, there's time on this, but I think if you're looking for date examples, I believe if you go into the IFRs, they actually kind of go through dates and they kind of provide that information, or the Q&A. But I mean, the SBA or the Treasury can provide that information.
Okay, thank you. Can I continue, or do you have a question? Okay, so the next question comes from Angelique. She says, what is the SBA review criteria? Do you have any insight on that?
No, okay. I wanted to make sure everybody knows. I mean, we, at this point in time, all we know, there is going to be an SBA review. That SBA review will occur after the bank's 60 days to do their decision. And like I said before, if you look at the instructions, I believe there's 4 things the banks needed to confirm, and then they made to make a decision and then submit to the SBA. At this point in time, we know nothing about the SBA's review process, and we do not know how to put it into the review process because there is no portal, there's no address, there is nothing. And that's one of the reasons why earlier I said on my one slide, be patient, because there'll be more to come.
Okay, thank you. So Steve, you're doing an awesome job, and I'm gonna go ahead and let Dave ask a question. Thank you, Steve.
So we keep talking about the changes and stuff. So so if you've already submitted the you've got your loan, and let's just say for whatever reason you submitted a forgiveness application, and then yet again some more changes come through down the road. I mean, are these changes as they go, are they retroactive to all borrowers?
I believe what the SBA has done with every IFR, every FAQ, it is as of that day going forward. So unless they put specific language in the act or the action that says it's backdated, normally, so like when we were doing forgiveness, the SBA came out with a rule saying, hey, banks and lenders, you need to do all your underwriting prior to getting your SBA loan number. Well, a lot of people, because they were afraid the money was going to run out, were running quickly in both processes where they're getting an SBA loan number and doing their underwriting simultaneously. Well, with phase 2, the SBA said, nope, you got to get the underwriting done first before you get your loan number. And that's the reason why, it took a little bit longer, and that whole 10-day window came out and stuff like that. So to me, they didn't make it retroactive because that might be detrimental to either the financial institution or the borrower. So normally it's not retroactive as of the day it passes. But keep in mind, if Congress gives them the capability in the legislation to make it retroactive, they could. So the SBA and Treasury don't do anything without congressional approval and the president's signature to make it a law.
Okay. Well, Tony, I'm going to have to ask this question from Ann.
Okay.
She says, I'm a bit frustrated with the changing rules. I own a retail store and kept all employees on full payroll during the shutdown, following the original rules. However, now they've changed. I would do things quite differently. For example, lay employees off. Now that we are open, revenue is still way down. And of course, she wants to know, can she apply for another PPP loan?
And as of this time, the answer is no. But they are looking at PPP loans for people. I think the biggest concern here was that the PPP funds went out, and one of the carve-outs that didn't occur was, what if your business was closed based upon your local, state, or municipalities' rulings to close certain businesses? Obviously, retail shops, you're looking at bars, restaurants, tattoo parlors, you name it. A lot of businesses were closed beyond, because it was a state or local municipality mandate. And that's one of the discussions that's going on in DC. And like I said, these are not this is stuff I'm reading from my national trade associations, things like that. So there may be, and like I said, this is a maybe situation, but as of today, the answer is no. And one thing I will also keep in mind with the forgiveness, and I want to touch on this, if you notice in the application for your PPP loan, it asks about employees. In the PPP loan forgiveness application, it's talking FTE. So they are using two different numbers, and there are some things in the long app that do not exist in the easy app that talk about, that could assist a borrower or a business that actually had a reduction in force or whatever. So that's the reason I'm saying you really need to talk to your accountant or your payroll processor kind of help through this process, because your bank's not going to be able to give you that advice. I mean, we have to stay arm's length. We can't be helping you fill the application and then giving you forgiveness. That's kind of not the purpose of it. But I think the idea is in your situation, this retail business owner situation, I think a call to your congressman may be in line and saying, how are you going to modify the PPP program to assist businesses that were closed based upon state mandate? And that's a huge hole, because the whole idea behind Paycheck Protection was to keep money flowing into people's paychecks. But the idea was, now we got to think about, well, how do we keep those businesses that were closed by mandate? How do we help them out? And I don't have that answer. Obviously, that's what we elect individuals for, so they can be smarter than me. But I think the idea is more. I would say, once again, more to come. And then, if you do have a contact, reach out to your local congressman, and if the state senator or U.S. senator's office, and see if there's any programs. We'll also say that in certain states and certain municipalities, they are actually stepping up to the plate also to help these businesses out with certain local funding or even like regional funding to help businesses. So, make the phone calls, check with your local organizations, your Chamber of Commerce, things like that. There could be some programs that you may not be aware of that could help. Obviously, it'll help a little bit and some of these could be grants. And so a lot of times, if you get a grant, it may not have to be repaid. So, but hopefully that helps, but not as, obviously no, but a lot of discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, that just a segue on that. In Louisville, the Louisville Metro just earmarked $20 million for grant programs to small business relief. So if you're in Louisville, please check that out, louisvilleky.gov, and get your application in. You have another question, Tony?
Yes, I do. So I think you kind of touched on this, but I keep getting this question. This person actually received their funds on April 20th, and they want to know, do they now have 24 weeks under the changes to the PP rules? And then they ask again about the 10 months deferment period.
Okay. So based upon the PPP Flexibility Act that was signed into law June 5th, anybody prior to getting their SBA loan number, which obviously an April date would be obvious for that, has the flexibility of 8 or 24. So it's kind of, for them, it's a lot more open. So if they were stressing to get the right percentages and stuff like that, they now have a little bit more freedom because they can actually look at a longer period to cover more payroll or how they want to do that. So yes, they have between 8 and 20, they have that 8 and 24 week period are available to them. And then, like I said, automatically all the deferment periods or deferral periods are 10 months after the loan forgiveness covered period, which is that 8 or 24 week period.
Thank you.
So that, hopefully it answers that. So.
I have one here from Tammy Carter. She says, please give examples of how we document the expenses for PPP loan forgiveness. Our loan will be used for payroll.
Well, I think the idea is the best examples that you can get, and obviously these are not mine, is actually to go to the interim final rule number 1, and it kind of tells you what, so if you think about what you provided when you made your application for the PPP loan, because they ask for like, payroll records, 941s, 940s, all that documentation, that's the same information that you're going to need to prove you spent the money on forgivable items. So I would think that, the best thing for you to do is look what you provided to get your PPP loan application approved, and then provide that or even a higher level of documentation. If, I'm a big guy, I like to see document, but, work with your payroll provider. If you cut checks manually and you take care of it internally, copies of canceled checks. How often do you do payroll? Get your files together, because, there is a ladder on the application process, the PPP application process. I'm assuming at this point in time, the instructions of what qualifies for payroll is going to go back to interim final rule 1 and then updated in 17, 18, and 19. So that information is available, treasury.gov or SBA.gov. Go to any of the coronavirus banners are usually in red, and you could actually read what is acceptable documentation. So that is available at their sites, and that's defined. But whatever you used at the application is probably what you need to mirror for forgiveness for the loan forgiveness covered period.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dave, do you have any questions, or you want me to continue?
Yeah, go ahead and ask the next one.
Okay, so this one comes from Sheila Kurtz. She says, do I understand correctly that there has not been any PPP forgiveness application that has been filed at all? For those who received their funds in April and the payment deferral ends in December, does she have enough time?
Well, number 1, the payment period doesn't end in December. That's the old methodology. She's thinking the 6 months after the loan covered period. So okay. Now think about it. If you had one in April and you elected the 8-week period, that would put you into June. So I'm just using months as opposed to specific days, because I think if I do a calendar, I'll make a mistake, and I don't want to give bad data to anybody. So if we say in April, they got the PPP funds were deposited into their account. They chose 8 weeks. So in June, the time's up. Well, if you take June, you had 6 months, that's December, add 4 more. You're in April of 2021 now. So you have, and that's that's your deferment period. And that changed because that one was retroactive. That one covered everybody. So December is not a final date now. Now we're talking April. But as I said earlier, check with your accountants and check, how your accounting is going to work. Some people are motivated to try to get it closed out this year. If it will not have a negative impact on any of your loan covenants, your ability to get access to capital, then you got till April. If you got the money in April, you got till next April if you choose the 8-week period, because it's 8 weeks plus 10 months. So it's a pretty long time period. But I'd still say, I'm counting 5 months, 2 for your bank, 3 for the SBA, makes 5. So, and like I said, if you're looking at it, then obviously pretty soon they're going to need to go in. But once again, the banks haven't opened portals or access to take applications because the SBA hasn't showed us how we can submit them for you. And so that's the reason why you're seeing a little bit of what I wouldn't call slowness, I'd call trepidation, because none of us want to take your application. We all want to get your loans forgiven. Every lender out there wants your loan forgiven. But the issue we're running into is we have no way to get you forgiveness. So what we're asking for is to be patient, because once we get the information from the SBA, based upon what we've seen with 22 interim final rules, we're going to get the initial information. It'll probably change, but that change will occur after the portals open. And so we have 60 days. So, but the other thing too, you can't call us and say, well, hold my application until day 59. We're going to process these as fast as we can, because keep in mind, there's millions of these loans out there. And you're talking the money out the door from the Treasury, via the banks is over half a trillion dollars. So this is a lot of money. So hopefully that helps that answer, but it's a long answer, but hopefully it gives them some idea and direction where we're looking at.
Well, let me ask you this. This kind of dovetails on a question from Karen. So you're on the inner circle and you get a lot of information. How would someone, a business owner, kind of keep tabs on some of these legislative changes that might affect their loan forgiveness application going forward?
Well, I think number one is, when they become law, they're available. So I actually have treasury.gov and sba.gov saved in my browser. So whether you use Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, save those in your browsers, check with them every day to see if there's any updates or any updated legislation. Number two, I think it's good to talk with your banking partners. We obviously, a lot of us are starting, are starting to open up our offices. People are able to come in now. So I would say a call to your banker who handled your PPP loan application, saying, hey, don't mean to bug you, but what updates do you have? And then part of it, I know for us as an institution, we have internal calls weekly with our line of business lenders who support the borrowers and the nonprofits so that they can know what's going on. So hopefully the institution you deal with is doing the same thing. They're providing up-to-date information on a weekly update. So, there's no shame in calling your banker or your lending institution. I can't obviously say not everybody used a bank. There were other fintech lenders who provide this service. So the only thing I don't know is how you communicate with them. But I know with the community bank structure that I'm part of, and I know a lot of other community banks are on this phone, we welcome a conversation with our clients. And, the honesty comes in and says, if I don't know there's a change, I'll let you know. But, as I say on these calls, but we have internally, I give them every update, like, well, they issued another interim final rule. We've got another FAQ. We've got a new procedure coming out. And we keep on talking about, these are the things that are changing. And so that way, when a customer calls in and has a question, the salespeople, the frontline individuals, the bankers can at least have an update. And that's all about it. We're all starving for information in this program. And the biggest thing is it's out there, but it's little bits here and there. But, a little bit can go a long way at this point in time.
Yeah. What's our next question, Tony?
So this one is about the EIDL advance and PPP. So Alice says, is the PPP amount decreased by the EIDL advance? So her example is received 60,000 and then a 60,000 from PPP and then a $5,000 advance from the EIDL.
Okay. Yeah.
So Yes.
That's a tough one. Now, because keep in mind too, in the PPP loan application, it states if you received an EIDL from January 31st through April 3rd, I think is the date. So the first question is, is when did they receive the EIDL?
They received it on May 8th, and then they received the PPP on May 1st.
Okay, but based upon the application that was submitted for the PPP, if you remember it in the application that the borrower fills out, it has your monthly payroll times 2.5 less, it's your plus EIDL, comma, net of advance. So if the 5,000 from the EIDL is an advance, I do not believe it needs to be paid back. But obviously, here's the catch-22. The PPP loan is a delegated lender program under the 7A program. The EIDL is a disaster loan program directly administered under 7B, I think, with the SBA. So I direct everybody, if you have an EIDL loan, go back to the SBA and say, okay, based upon my PPP application, what I received should not reduce or be paid by my PPP, and the SBA needs to answer that. But the way the application reads, it looks like that's the grant, that 5,000 is. The grant is that net of grant, so it doesn't need to be added into the PPP. Now, here's the caveat, though. There was a little bit of language came out there talking about if your EIDL loan was used for payroll, then you should use your PPP funds to pay off the EIDL. But for the EIDL program, I have been pushing all questions back to the SBA unless it's over the advance or the grant amount. And then that one there becomes a little more, and I talked to my field office and just to make sure that we have the right calculations is what I've been doing. So the EIDL is very confusing. And then also, I will say it right now, I certainly hope that borrower read all the language in the EIDL loan documents because there are certain provisions that are restrictive covenants that if you do any future borrowing could impact your ability. And based upon the dollar amount, that should be a unsecured, so they should not have signed a UCC. I think it's anything over 25,000 requires a UCC filing, and that actually could cause a problem for future borrowing if the SBA will not subordinate. So there's a couple issues with the EIDL, like I said, but I've been returning all questions on the EIDL to the SBA directly because that is a disaster program that they are managing, and the banks do not have all the inner workings on that one. But the application does provide a time period and what should be added and what should be netted out. So I would go back to the application, and as long as they were truthful at the time of the application, then it should not impact their PPP. But if they're using that EIDL for payroll purposes, I think the follow-up conversations I've heard, and like I said, this is not, I can't quote an IFR or anything, because I've heard that they would like those funds, the EIDLs, to be paid off if they've been used for payroll by the PPP loan. So, but I would direct that borrower back to the SBA to make sure that they have the right instructions.
It's getting a little late, Tony. Let's ask one more question, and then I know we got to let Steve get back to work, but it's been great so far. So what do you got, Tony?
Oh, wow. You would do that to me, right? Okay. So, okay, I'll ask this one. This one comes from Randy Coates. Okay. He says, previously on May 5th, this question came up from a listener. Any solutions? I have an S Corp. I don't process payroll, and he's the only employee of his company. I just got approved for a PPP loan. Do I need to open up a payroll account prior to issuing any payments to myself, or would issuing a check directly from the business account be sufficient?
Okay, that is not a banker question. That is actually a accountant question, because what you're looking at doing is it's really, how are you going to allocate those funds and how you're going to do that? I would go back to whoever helped you fill out the application, because obviously if you're an S Corp with no employees, you had to file the 2019 Schedule C, I believe. If you're that, there's all these things that delineate how much money you can get and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. But that's more of an accountant question. I know we at my institution, if you were new to the bank, we required an account to be open for those funds. If you were an existing borrower, most of our borrowers put it in their payroll accounts so they could account for it that way. So that is more anecdotal than it is advice. But I would go back to whoever helped you with the application, provided the, the 2019 Schedule C, because I think it's line 31 derives your income and for your S corps. But I think they should be able to give you better advice on that than any banker could, because I don't pretend to be a CPA.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well,
I'm going to throw one more question in there, because this is a good one. From Angelique, is the interest accrued forgiven as well? Is that part of the process?
Yes, as a matter of fact, in one of my slides, I think I had it in there too. If we went back to one of the slides, it actually said it's the principal and accrued interest. It's really accrued interest up until the date that the SBA determines forgiveness. So I imagine processing wise, because the money will probably come back to the banks by ACH or whatever, the banks will have to probably waive a couple of dollars or pennies here and there. But it is supposed to be up until the date the loan, the SBA makes a forgiveness decision. And I just want to be very clear, the SBA can make a partial forgiveness decision too.
That's good.
Yeah, so it's, keep in mind, the banks are going to send their decision in. The SBA is not bound by that. And if they feel that the funds were used not in the spirit of the program, they could say, well, we're going to forgive 80% of this loan. And here's 80% of the loan balance and 80% of the accrued interest. Have a nice day, borrower. And there is their appeal process. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know yet, but there's a lot to learn that we'll figure out.
Yeah.
So Steve, I just wanted you to know that you've been getting loads of praise over here for your presentation. Sheila says, wonderful presentation, great speaker, and she says, God bless you. She says, will a recording of this webinar be available? It's my understanding there is going to be a recording, right, Dave?
That's right. So you'll get an email probably tomorrow after all the tech stuff gets processed. You'll also get a copy of the slides, and then don't forget to download some of the handouts that we've included today. You may need some of those forms. At least you would want to be familiar with them. So,
and just one more thing, Margaret Neal, she says, very informative presentation, very knowledgeable speaker. Thank you very much. She has it in all caps. Thank you.
Wow, she's yelling at us then. Okay, good.
In a good way. She's yelling
in a good way. In a good way.
Yeah.
So, Steve, I want to thank you. This has been great. It's been. I'm really impressed with the amount of passion you have for this subject, which is crazy. But I think I'm glad you're there to help people. So
thank you
again. Thank you. And just I'll repeat one more time. Tomorrow you'll get an email from us with a copy of this recording and the slides and download the documents that you need. And so once again, we're glad you joined us today for our weekly webinar. Tony, you got anything you want to join? Add?
No, I just want to say thank you, Steve. You were wonderful. I appreciate your patience. You were a total trooper, so thank you.
You're very welcome, Tony and Dave. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to really be able to help other lenders and borrowers in the state of Kentucky, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. And everyone on the call, we're happy you were here, and hopefully you'll reach out to us if we can help you in any way. And we'll look forward to you next week when we'll be talking with some of the fine folks from HubSpot, one of the bigger tech firms in the country, talking about e-commerce and blogging for your business. So with that, I think we'll call it a day and see you next week. Thank you. And thank you so much, Steve.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.